Hello, welcome everyone to the Office of Higher Education Public Engagement Call. We are glad that you were able to join us this morning. I'm Maya Beecham, Grants Coordinator for the agency, and I would like to pass the call over to our Commissioner, Commissioner Dennis Olson.
Thank you, Maya, and thanks everybody for joining us this morning for the latest call in our public engagement call series from the Office of Higher Education. The purpose of this morning's call is that the Office of Higher Education seeks to engage with diverse communities to identify barriers in post-secondary education. The agency will work in collaboration with communities to provide equitable access to information and advice that lead to the pursuit of post-secondary education and or training for all Minnesotans. The topic of this morning's call is titled The American Indian Experience in Higher Education. This event is convened by the Office of Higher Education, and it'll include an esteemed panel of higher education leaders, students, and stakeholders that will discuss the American Indian experience in higher education. The discussion will include topics of educational attainment, cultural identity, some suggested policy changes that may be needed, and of course, addressing barriers. We hope you all find the topic of this call valuable and educational. We hope that the information shared today by our panelists helps to shape the way you serve American Indian students after learning about their experiences, and hopefully it helps to provide a springboard for additional inquiry and questions to follow up with. So really appreciate everybody's participation this morning and look forward to the discussion with our panelists. Before we do that, we would like to take a moment to hear from our governor's office, the office of Governor Tim Walz and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. We have with us this morning Dominic McQueary, who's the governor's office housing policy advisor. And Dominic is going to share with us a few brief updates from the governor's housing policy office before we dive into our topic this morning. So if I may turn it over to Dominic McQueary.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson, and good morning to everyone. Thanks for having me. I will do my best not to take up too much time because it sounds like a really exciting and awesome conversation that's going to follow. So we've just been trying to do some outreach to let people know about some of the work that we've been doing and some of the resources that are currently available for people who are struggling with their housing stability. So I think the first one and the biggest one is many people know in March, the governor established a moratorium on most and almost all types of evictions. And this week, the governor extended the peacetime emergency again for another 30 days. So that eviction moratorium is tied directly to the peacetime emergency. So that means on October 12th, a couple of days ago, the eviction moratorium was also extended for another 30 days. So I know there's a lot of confusion out there sometimes about if the moratorium is going to lapse or how it interacts with the federal moratorium. What I can say is that the moratorium that the governor and lieutenant governor put into place is stronger than the one on the federal level and remains in place as long as that peacetime emergency remains in place. And I'm happy, I'll drop my email into the chat and happy to get more into the weeds on that topic if anybody has any desire to do that. But I think the most important message is that that protection is still out there for people who are struggling. We know that the moratorium does not help people stay up to date with their rent, which is also, or their housing costs, just more generally, their mortgages as well, which is why the governor and lieutenant governor made $100 million available to help people who have gotten behind on their rent, mortgages, or utility bills. So that program, we've already received around $30 million in requests, but it is using some of the federal funds that we got in the CARES Act, which expire at the end of the year. So we really want to do everything that we can to make sure every penny of that $100 million is getting to people who need it to help them pay their rent, their mortgage, their utility bills. So we have a partnership with 211 and the United Way as the central portal for that. So the easiest way is just to go on 211unitedway.org. It's right on the landing page, the Minnesota COVID Housing Assistance Program, or the CHAP, because we love acronyms in government. Minnesota Housing has been calling it the CHAP. There is language assistance for Somali, Hmong, and Spanish as a part of that, and also more specific interpretation can be provided if needed. So please, if you know anybody who has gotten behind on their rent or their mortgage and are struggling to pay their housing costs, please direct them to that program. We want to make sure that all of that is getting into the hands of people before the end of the year, and we can try to get them caught up as hopefully the economy starts to recover as well, and hopefully people are able to get back to work and on their feet. Lost my train of thought there for a second. Oh, I think just one other important note on that program. It's not something we talk about often, but there is no citizenship check or requirement on that. So I know that certain people have good relationships with our people with different documentation statuses out there in the community, or might be serving students who have different documentation statuses. It's not something that's explicitly asked for, and something we've worked really hard to let people know that we want to protect all of our residents of Minnesota and help them get caught up on their bills if possible. Just another additional note on that. I know that we've been seeing an unprecedented amount of homelessness in the state. It's something that I think a lot of people on the call know has been a growing problem in our state and our community for a very long time, but COVID-19 has just made all of the issues that have been, directly below the surface a lot worse in public. So I want everyone to know as well that it's been very top of mind for the governor and lieutenant governor as well. The state has made over $70 million available since the start of COVID-19 to help try to get people indoors into spaces that are safer in the context of a pandemic, be it hotel rooms, decompressing and having better sanitation practices in existing shelters, and hopefully moving people into more permanent housing solutions. And seeing that question in the chat, yep, I'll drop that information in at the end. But just trying to do everything that we can, and we've been fairly successful thus far in keeping the number of cases in the population of people experiencing homelessness low. But as we head towards the winter and more people are coming indoors, I know there's a lot of concern about further expansion of cases, especially in that population who's living in congregate settings. So we're doing everything that we can to partner with local governments. We've had great partnerships and successes in recent months with tribal governments working through the housing supports program, and then also, of course, our nonprofit providers who are oftentimes on the front lines doing the work and engaging directly with those people. So there's a lot of work left to do, but I can let you know that we have an interagency team that's meeting every single day internally and with external partners, trying to work rapidly to expand as many spaces as we can as the temperature begins to drop. So that's just a little bit about what's going on at the governor's office and in the state government as it relates to housing and homelessness in the context of COVID. But I will drop the information for the programs into the chat. I know that Maya was going to share out a slide I had planned to present that has some of this information on it as well. And then I'll also drop my email in the chat, and feel free to reach out to me anytime on the issues of housing and homelessness. I also cover veterans affairs, broadband development, gambling, and liquor as well. So if you happen to have something in one of those areas too, feel free to reach out. Oh, actually, one final thing. Sorry, Commissioner. Today, we're hoping that the legislature will pass a big bill that is the bonding bill, which has some really needed investments in our higher education system, but also includes over $100 million in investments for housing development and public housing rehabilitation. So if you got a second, you can reach out to your officials about the need for us to have more money in the system to create permanent, affordable, attainable housing for people. Today's a really big day to hopefully get that across the finish. So almost forgot my bonding bill plug.
Thanks, Dominic. Really appreciate that. And yeah, thank you for that. We know how important a robust bonding bill is for higher education, but we also recognize that there's a lot of additional important investments in there as well. So thank you for highlighting the connections to that as well. I see Dominic put his email in the chat. So like he said, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out directly to him. We'll also monitor the chat. Dominic, if you want to just hang out for a couple of minutes if anything happens to pop in, but if not, we'll be sure to send those questions directly to you for direct follow-up. I really appreciate your participation, your information this morning. It's much appreciated. With that, we want to jump right into the topic at hand, discussing the American Indian experience in higher education. Once again, I am Dennis Olson, the Commissioner of the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. I've been enrolled citizen of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, one of our 11 tribal nations here in Minnesota. And before I introduce my panelists, or our panelists today for the call, I wanted to just share a couple of brief updates and then set the table a little bit for what to expect for the call. So on behalf of the Office of Higher Education, we wanted to remind folks that this month is College Knowledge Month, and we have some related events, and we will share links to the events in the chat. But ultimately, the goal of College Knowledge Month is to provide every graduating high school senior with the preparation, the opportunity, and support needed to apply to college. The month-long effort each October allows students to do more than just submit a college application. Within this time frame, students can participate in college exploration and planning processes at their own pace. And schools can align this initiative with many college exploration activities that are already taking place during the fall. And so we have a couple of links to what post-secondary institutions are doing around waiving application fees during College Knowledge Month. We'll also provide some links to free applications, and then wanted to make note of a couple of upcoming webinars. So on October 20th, there will be a webinar specifically walking through a line-by-line of the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. That'll be a demonstration. More information will be coming there, but we wanted to let you know that this will be hosted by Jesus Hernandez from the Office of Higher Education, and also co-hosted by Minnesota Department of Education and our office as well. And then on October 27th, there's a training specifically for the DREAM Act. And the session will provide updated information and tips for working with students to complete the DREAM Act application. This will be hosted by Megan Flores in our office, as well as co-sponsored by our office and the Minnesota Department of Education. So I wanted to note a couple of those things really quickly here before we dove in. For the call, you may have seen on the flyers as you registered for the call or the webinar that we have a long list of panelists, and we realize that we may not get to everyone or get to all the questions, and so we hopefully will have a very lively and valuable discussion today. But we also know that there may be a need for a part two. We are going to, as much as we can, answer questions today. And we want to also make space and time for some live questions as well. And so within the format, you'll see the chat function is open. Dominic has dropped a few things in there, like I had mentioned earlier. If you have a question that you feel you'd like to point to either one of the panelists specifically or just ask generally, please feel free to drop it in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we monitor that and try to get to those questions. And then again, if there are questions that we don't get to, we'll look for an opportunity to do a follow-up call on this topic as it is incredibly important. So I wanted to just remind everyone that the chat function is open during this call. So feel free to ask questions if you can. I also know that I'm on video, as is many of our panelists. So if you want to give us any compliments about anything, feel free to. I'm always willing and open to take compliments too. So I appreciate that. Wanted to introduce our panelists. I had mentioned we have a long list of panelists with us today. I had mentioned myself as the moderator of today's panel. I also want to introduce to you Raymond Burns, who's the president of the Leech Lake Tribal College. We also have with us today David Isham, who's a student success coordinator for American Indian students at Metro State University. David is also the Metropolitan Area at-large representative for the Tribal Nations Education Committee. We also have with us today John Gwynn, who's a Strategic Projects Manager at Megazee. And if you haven't seen the recent news around Megazee's efforts for fundraising to replace their building, please check that out. Definitely an incredible effort there on behalf of Megazee. We also have with us today Alyssa Parkhurst, who's a student with us today from Augsburg University. We also have Laura Gerhardsen, who's our outreach liaison for the Minnesota Indian Scholarship Program at the Office of Higher Education. We also have with us today Chanel Flower, who's a freshman's admission counselor and American Indian recruitment coordinator at the University of Minnesota, as a member of Red Lake Nation. We have with us as well Jacob MacArthur, who's a student at the White Earth Tribal and Community College, and Clarence Rainey, a student from the Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College with us today. We also may be, at some point during the call, joined by two additional panelists, Dan King, the president of Red Lake Nation College, as well as Jesse Cadet, the tribal education director for the Lower Sioux Indian community, as well as the Lower Sioux representative on the Tribal Nations Education Committee. So I can't say enough how appreciative I am of all of our panelists today, both higher education professionals, community members, and students with us. And I wanted to just set the table a little bit for you in terms of what we're going to be talking about, and then I want to jump right into questions. So I wanted to start this call by really recognizing that American Indians have experienced a complex and honestly an often troubling history with education, stemming primarily from numerous federal and state policies that were specifically designed with the sole intent to assimilate and really in many respects eradicate American Indian people. The first interaction with formal Western education came with the introduction of mission schools and later federal boarding schools in the late 19th century. These policies lasted into the 1960s and early 1970s. And really in federal boarding schools, these were environments where children were forcibly removed from home, sent away from home, sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of miles, stripped of their culture, stripped of their language, and really everything it meant to be Native. As Army Colonel Richard Pratt, who is the founder of the Carlisle Indian Boarding School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, has been famously quoted, "Boarding school education was designed to, quote, kill the Indian in him to save the man." I'll say it again. Kill the Indian, save the man. The education policy of the federal government was simply assimilation. Today, that historical trauma and impact of numerous detrimental policies live within all of us as American Indians. But we are resilient. And despite efforts to assimilate and eliminate us, we are still here. As we celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day earlier this week, we celebrate the fact that here in Minnesota, we have 11 vibrant, separate, and distinct tribal nations. We have diverse urban Indian communities, our native languages, our unique histories, our cultures, our families, and Native people are working hard to improve their communities and blaze a path forward, a path for future generations to walk. And here in Minnesota, we're proud of the educational foundation that has been built by those that came before us. We have the University of Minnesota Morris campus, which was a former boarding school and now offers tuition waivers to American Indian students. The University of Minnesota also has the proud distinction of establishing the first American Indian Studies department in the nation. The National Indian Education Association, the nation's oldest and largest Indian education advocacy organization, was founded right here in Minneapolis in the late 60s. We have public and private institutions that have committed to serving Indian students by establishing American Indian Resource Centers on campus. We have 4 tribal colleges here in Minnesota, many of which we have represented here today. And with all that being said, though, we know we have work to do, which is why we felt it was critically important to facilitate this call today and really amplify the voices of some of our many American Indian leaders and students in higher education. The Office of Higher Education is also committed to being a partner in improving the educational experience of American Indian students and increasing educational attainment. you've had a chance to look at our most recent Educating the Future report, which we can maybe drop a link to or point you to our website to find a copy of. That report examines the progress towards the state's educational attainment goal that was set by the legislature in 2015. Our current estimates show that 62.2% of Minnesotans aged 25 to 44 have completed a post-secondary credential. That percentage has increased slightly as compared to 2015. And we know that white Minnesotans still have the highest attainment in the state at 67.8%, while American Indian communities have the lowest attainment percentage in the state at 28%. We know that approximately 13.4% of persons of color aged 25 to 44 completing a certificate or degree have a certificate as their highest credential. For American Indians, however, 34% of college completers have a certificate as their highest credential. This shows the stratification by race and ethnicity in program of study chosen. We also know that if we're going to meet our attainment goal, we need an additional 110,000 persons aged 25-44 in Minnesota to complete a post-secondary credential by 2025 if we're to meet our goal. If we're to meet our goal equitably, we need 6,120 credentials earned by American Indians in Minnesota to meet that goal equitably and have 70% attainment for American Indians as well. And so I just wanted to set that stage for you a little today to understand where our communities are coming from, where our professionals are coming from, and ultimately where our students are coming from today. And so with that, I'd like to jump right into some of the questions that we've had prepared for the day today. And I'm just going to pull them up really quickly here. The first question I'd like to pose to the panel is really, can you tell me any, or can you tell any of the call participants today, what gaps in resources exist today and what may be needed in Indian education to improve outcomes for American Indian students? And maybe just for ease, if I could call on one of our panelists, maybe President Burns, if I may start with you.
Yeah, sure. Just to introduce myself, I'm Raymond Burns, president of Leech Lake Tribal College. I'm actually a member of the Lakudere Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa from Wisconsin, but I am a Minnesota resident, so no Packer hate, please. I think maybe the best way to open that, the answer with that is just the recognition that there are Indian education programs that are every bit as academically qualified and academically recognized as any other program in the state. Speaking from a tribal college perspective, there's a lot of times where it seems like we are considered less than or other than, and it gets really frustrating to develop partnerships and to have access to those resources when we're not seen as the equivalent of, I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but like Central Lake College or Bemidji State University, or University of Minnesota Morris, we're seen as this other thing. But we have the same needs. Our students have the same needs. In fact, we have probably additional needs because of the residential life that a lot of students and a lot of students' families need. Speaking from a tribal college perspective, a majority of our students are parents. So right now during the pandemic, they're not only having to be students, they're actually having to be teachers as well, because they are, of course, having to take over some of that learning and teaching experience. So really, it is really just a recognition that we're here. And, we do want to work. That's the thing. We do want to work. We do want to partner. We do want to collaborate. But at the same time, a lot of times we're brought in as filling a check mark. Did you reach out to Native communities? Yep. And then that's it. We're not a partner. And I think that's really the key, is that partnership be established.
Yeah, thank you, President Burns. That's really important to note, and really appreciate you sharing from the tribal college perspective. It's helpful to hear that side. Anyone else want to weigh in on any unmet needs or feel exist within higher education or for the larger American Indian community?
Hi, this is David Isham. How are you doing? I'm David Isham in the Shanikas, Makudoere, near Hayward, Wisconsin, Jindonjaba. I have, for the majority of my professional life, I've been involved with Indian education. One of the things that we have done at Metropolitan State University is that when we have public outings such as this, we start off with the land acknowledgement statement, simply stating that we acknowledge the land and the tribal nations upon it whose land this work is being accomplished. We acknowledge that we are on Dakota land. We recognize the Native nations on this region and we call this place home over thousands of years, including the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Lakota, Nakota, Ho-Chunk, and Cheyenne. We acknowledge the ongoing colonialism and the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that foreground the formation of the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities. We share that with people because, as my colleague Ray Burns has mentioned, a lot of times we are an afterthought. We are invisible for the most part. And because we are invisible, we have to make that noted statement going forward. I can remember growing up being part of this institution we call education. And back in the day when I was in grade school, whenever we talked about Native people was on separate occasions when we acknowledged the discovery of America. Apparently up to that point, we didn't know we were even here. But when we were discovered as by Christopher Columbus, we make notation of that. We also make notation of Thanksgiving. And from beyond that, I think some of the other times that I can recall, and this is etched in my mind from my grade school, and it's been quite a while since I've been in grade school, but it's still there. It's a traumatic feeling you get. Other times we talked about Native people is typically when you talk about social status. And in that social status, at that time, we were equated with the destitute, the alcoholic, the skid row bum. And these are the things that were etched in not only my mind, but my peers as classmates, that they got a small view of what it was, or what they perceived Native people to be. Now, even at a young age, I thought about that and I thought, wait a minute, now what they're talking about here does not always resonate with me. I looked and I said, my mom's not an alcoholic. My dad isn't. My uncles aren't. My cousins aren't. So I had to etch out my own safe haven within this area that we call education. And later on, as I was being part of this, it was not uncommon for me, being a Native person in classrooms, and in particular college classrooms, that when it came to being the only Native in classroom, if we were discussing anything that was Native, all of a sudden I became the spokesperson for all 565 different nations in what we call the United States. And I was asked to present the Native viewpoint on this. Now that's kind of difficult. That's kind of hard to have someone, a professor, calling you and you have to tell them what being a Native was all about. Now this was after the fact, and as Commissioner Olson described, the boarding school. I'm the third generation removed, but the ramifications of what had happened when the attempt was to kill the Indian and save the man, and my parents were put in a predicament where they are in a situation where they had to decide what is the best route for my children, to continue that assimilation mode so that they have a fighting chance to be out there competing for jobs out there in the spectrum that we call employment, or do we continue to generate and advocate strongly for us as Native people, and instill in our children that the lessons that should be instilled in us through our languages, through our culture, through our spirituality. All these things are very interrelated, and none of this is being offered in our educational environment today. I mean, as Native people, we're screaming. I mean, and you can tell we're screaming because of the low numbers or the low achievement rates we're seeing in this educational environment. But we are not meeting that particular need. You are providing us with services that help us prepare for the non-Native world. But for the Native world, in the absence of who we are as Native people, we are coming up way short on that. Our Indian education departments are trying desperately to make this work for Native people going forward. But unfortunately, they're underfunded, understaffed. Their expectations are great, but unfortunately, that just does not happen. So yes, there are a lot of things that we need to do out there, and we are taking steps toward that. As part of the Tribal Nations Education Committee, we are looking at curriculum. How do we become more inclusive in curriculum in making this count and appeal to those constituents, both Native and non-Native, to get a better handle of who we are as Native people in this, our own homeland. We can't go anyplace else on this planet, and I can't go to visit a place in South America that's dedicated to Ojibwe people. That doesn't happen. But I have the opportunity, if I wanted to visit Europe and visit Ireland, if I want to immerse myself in Irish culture and tradition. For us, this is it here. And a lot of that has been taken away from us, and we are desperately trying to hold on to that and spring forward and bring others into this fold as well. So I really appreciate being part of this particular panel and all the great work that we are looking to do. And we got great leadership out there, and I really appreciate being part of this panel. Thank you.
There you go, David. Thank you for that insights. That's a great dovetail from my introduction, as well as a dovetail into the next question I want to ask. And I want to pose this question to some of our students on the panel, as well as some of our student service providers. What David just talked about really brushes on, the importance of history and culture and our language being accurately represented. And so I want to ask and start with students, if I can, how important is it to see your culture, your language, and your history accurately represented and taught and promoted? And I think more specifically, promoted in your higher education experience right now. Do you see that in your college? And if not, how can it be improved? So if any of our students want to jump in, I'd appreciate starting with them.
Well, at Fond du Lac, they do offer language classes, and we do have Lake Superior Anishinaabe, which is a required class. During that required class, I learned a lot of stuff I didn't know. I mean, and each student is required to take this class, no matter what they're doing in school. I would like to see more cultural stuff, as like learning how to hunt, rice, gather. I mean, all that other stuff isn't offered yet, but it could be. Even as far as making the wigwams or whatever, we don't have it all yet, but I know they're trying to work on it. But culture is a main thing that did keep me interested and staying in school. When I started out, I walked in with a list of 5 classes to get my certificate. I didn't understand what I was doing there. I didn't know who to go to. I really was lost. But then I started with these classes, and as I started these classes, I figured, well, I can do this. Then I figured, well, I might as well go back and just start all over and get the AA along with the certificate. And now I'm in my AAS waiting to pass that. So it's just one step after another, but you do need the outreach, your advisors' help. You can't do it by yourself. You need some help. I did it backwards. I went for the certificate first when I should have started with my AA first and move forward. So now I'm 2 years behind. I already learned that. I learned my certificate stuff way too soon for what I'm going to go into when I leave college. And But as far as the culture stuff goes, you can't beat it. I mean, I've learned so much stuff that I didn't know, and not being around the culture all my life, like I wish I would have. It does keep me engaged and wanting to come back and learn more.
Yeah, appreciate that, Clarence. Miigwech, for sharing. And you said something really important there, and well, it was kind of a theme for throughout your comments. But that culture kept you interested and kept you grounded and really staying in school. Any other students with that experience that found that that the cultural connection was really the hook and the motivation you needed to continue on your pathway?
Jacob McCarthy here. I graduated from the White Earth Tribal College this past spring. I've since continued my education at Bemidji State beginning this spring as well. The cultural classes we offer here at the Tribal College, they really draw people in, not just enrolled members, but also community members. People come here to experience our culture classes, arts, history, the language classes. They're really engaging, and again, they really draw people in. At first, you're coming here to learn about the culture. As you go on, after a while, you're just learning in general, and it's really easy to draw you in and continue on that path towards graduation here and continuing education elsewhere. So those culture classes are very important in drawing people in and increasing engagement.
Miigwech, Jacob, really appreciate that as well. And I think we see a theme emerging here in that, there is a critical importance to connecting that culture on campus with particularly needs of Native students, and really is a motivating factor. Anybody else, other students we have? Otherwise, I'd love to hear from some of our professionals on the call that are closest to students, maybe Chanel at the University of Minnesota, or potentially Laura to answer this question. And then I'll preview that by saying I see a question in the chat about K through 12 Indian education programs, and so hoping to tease this answer into what we can do in the K-12 system to help prepare Native students. But keeping on the history, language, and culture needs, anybody else want to weigh in?
I'll go. So hello everyone, my name is Alyssa Parkhurst. I'm from the Red Lake Nation, and I'm currently a second year at Augsburg University. I feel like it's definitely important to see my own history and my culture accurately represented in class. There has been times in class, in a history class in college, where teachers they don't know everything, or it's like they'll still even just say, oh, the Indians did this, da 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 da. And it's like, it's kind of hard to navigate that, because it's like, well, this is supposed to be my professor and they're supposed to know this, but they don't. And then it's like, I kind of felt like weird being in that class at first, but I feel like a lot of it is definitely just, taking it into your own hands and actually talking to your professors. And, it sucks having to feel like you have to be that person to speak up. But then it's like, if you don't speak up, then nobody will know this. Nobody will hear how you think about it. And, the whole reason I even came to Augsburg was for the American Indian Studies program. And because Ojibwe is taught here. And we're so thankful that at Augsburg we have Randy Greshik teaching Ojibwe. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's definitely important that it's accurately represented. But I think what we can do is navigate for ourselves and, speak up about it.
Hey, go ahead, Alyssa. And I'm glad to hear you're taking Ojibwe with Mr. Greshik. I've known Mr. Greshik since college myself, and definitely a gold nugget, a jewel to have in our community regarding Ojibwe language. Appreciate that. Anyone else before I move on to a question in the chat? Anyone else want to weigh in?
Laura and Indigenicas. Hello, my name is Laura. I'm the outreach liaison with the Minnesota Indian Scholarship Program. And I'm from both White Earth and Red Lake Nations, and also Leech Lake Band of Chippewa. So I would say that it is so important to see our culture and our language and everything about us accurately represented. And too often, as a couple people have already mentioned, one person is in the class and is the representative for all American Indians. And that's really difficult. And so I think it's incredibly important for non-natives to seek out information that will educate them. I know that there are resources that I would recommend, both books and films that I think are really great entrees into why American Indian students may act a certain way in class. You know, we're taught to listen, not necessarily to make eye contact. So you're supposed to give us your ear instead of your eyes, because that means you're listening. And so sometimes when I've spoken to non-native educators, they think that a student isn't listening because they're not looking at them. And I think that just culturally, it's really important to learn those little nuances so that you know that student is listening because they're not looking at me, you know? But I would just say that the students that I see that have the most success have a mentor in their lives. And whether that be an American Indian advisor, either in high school or college, or just somebody that they rely on in their own family unit, I think it's just really important that we provide mentors for students so they can see how different people have progressed throughout their post-secondary careers, see the successes, see the obstacles, and learn to overcome them from seeing the examples. So I think that's really important. I also think community is really vital to making sure that our students are successful. So creating gathering places, creating community forums for students. A lot of the time it's real lonely for students if they don't have their community around them. So if they're leaving home to go to a school and they don't have the community they've grown up with and become accustomed to and have their cultural aspects around them all the time, it's important to create that on the campus as much as possible. So I've just really seen students thrive when they have someone to either help them and mentor them or have gathering places.
Yeah, Miguel, thank you, Laura. Important to note the importance of mentors as well as some of those cultural differences. I'm going to ask that Chanel kind of start this next question off. And it's kind of a two-part question I'm pulling from the chat here. We had a participant ask about K-12 education and, you know, what can all teachers and administrators in the K-12 system do to support American Indian students in completing K-12 education and moving towards post-secondary pathways, so we know that that important transition point between high school and college. And then that leads to another question in the chat that said, I'm trying to find it here. I see, could the students talk about experiences in high school or who supported them in their success? I think, Laura, you mentioned that with some of the mentors, but, you know, really talk about that transition points from high school to college for a Native student. What are the importance of Indian education programs? And then how can that transition into college?
Absolutely. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chanel Flower. I'm an admissions rep for the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. That being said, I can speak on both working with Indian Ed counselors now and also being a graduate of the Indian Ed program. They do some amazing work. It's a very, very vital program. But I was hoping that this question would get brought up because I saw it in the chat and it is so important. They do so much great work, but they need support. And it can't be just them doing it. In my opinion, it shouldn't just be American Indian students that are being educated about this. I think it's vital that they are being taught this. And I think that if I didn't have my American Indian educator, I wouldn't be where I am today. But I think non-Native students need to be educated about this very early on. I think what I experienced in college as a student, because I'm also an alum from the U, was students were they had been taught the wrong history for so long that by the time that they were taught the correct history by American Indian Studies professors, they were too set in their ways to be able to accept it. And that became very hard to sit in those classes for myself and other Native students. But as far as what other K through 12 teachers can do is find ways to connect with the Indian educators and see what they can do to support them and see what they can do to incorporate that into their own classrooms. And bring in people like me who can help with the transition process, because I have a strong partnership with the rest of the folks on my campus that offer student support services for American Indian students. There's a very firm handoff where I will find the students if they're interested in the U. I will most certainly do the best that I can to help them get there and pursue the interests that they have. And then I hand them directly off to Circle of Indigenous Nations, where they will continue to get the support services that will help them succeed and graduate. And then they already have a community on campus where I felt like I didn't have one. So for me, this is kind of a really awesome opportunity to be able to show students that there is a community on campus. There is a way to transition from high school to college as a Native student that doesn't have to be so difficult, even at a large institution like the U of M.
Thank you, Shinomi. Go ahead. Anyone else on that, particularly the transition from high school to college? And then as well in the chat, there was a question about, could some of the students talk about their experiences in high school or earlier that supported them in their success? So ultimately, you know, what in elementary, middle, or high school led them to pursue higher education, and was that the Indian education program or something else, like Laura had mentioned, was a mentor? So anyone else there?
Hi, this is Alyssa again. Well, what I feel like Indian Ed definitely helped me. I have a younger sister who's just a year under me, and before we did have Indian education in my high school, but the Indian Ed staff would only come once, maybe twice a month, and it was nice to have them there, but it was like it just wasn't all the time, you know. And then so my junior year of high school, we actually had a program called the Braided Journeys program, and it was through St. Paul Indian Ed. And so basically we had 2 support staff at our school full time every day. And so we had a tutor and like a coach, if you will. And so we'd also have like our own homeroom for first hour. And so we'd start the day off in a good way. Other Indian Ed staff would come here and there. Every morning we'd have a smudge circle, sometimes offer out our tobacco, but I feel like having this like class with all the other Native students on campus definitely helped build that sense of community with everyone, that sense of pride that like, hey, like we're all Native and, you know, we're all just here together. And I think someone that definitely contributed to my high school success and me wanting to, you know, pursue post-secondary was the Braided Journeys coach, Julia Littlewolf, if anyone knows her. I feel like going into high school, I remember telling everyone like, oh, I'm not going to go to college. Like I still have 4 years of high school and then I'd have to go more years after that. Like that, no, thank you. Like I don't want to go to college. I remember telling people I wasn't going to go to college. And then, you know, throughout high school, I remember just even Julia, she would just be like, hey, could you do this for us? Could you speak at, you know, this assembly for the class, for the school, for Indigenous Peoples Day? And I would just be like, why me? And she'd be like, you know, we look to you, like you're our leader in our class. And, you know, I never knew before that I was a leader, but it was like just having someone there to tell you that you are, it like makes you feel like you are, especially if, you know, they do things where they ask more of you than they'd ask someone else. So I wish all St. Paul Public Schools had this Braided Journeys program, but so far it's only Johnson and Harding who have it. But I know that's what contributed to my success, and I know it definitely helped my sister too.
Here you go, Alyssa. Any of our other students want to weigh in before I move on to another question? Okay, well, if you want to jump back into that in an answer to another question, feel free, panelists. I want to turn our attention really briefly. We heard early on from President Ray Burns at the Leech Lake Tribal College. I want to know, with 4 tribal colleges in Minnesota, what should everyone on the call know about what tribal colleges have to offer, and what could other institutions of higher ed learn from the tribal college model? What's different in tribal colleges? And then it ties into a question we received privately in the chat about, you know, can non-native students participate? What is the requirement for being an enrolled citizen of a tribe or not, or being non-Indian with attending some of these institutions and participating in these programs? So if I could point that question first to our tribal college students and President.
Well, I'll take that first. You know, with the 4 tribal colleges in the state, you know, and Fond du Lac is a little different because they're also part of the state system. I think the biggest thing that I would have people understand is that the tribal college is really an extension of the community, to an extent that, you know, even the most integrated community college would probably envy. Our staff and faculty are made up of community members, former graduates. Almost every one of our events has some sort of tie back to the community. Many of our students are related to staff and faculty, you know, if not here, at another tribal college. One of the really nice things about the tribal college is that we all talk to each other and work together to try to share resources, because tribal colleges, as a general rule, are incredibly under-resourced. So we try to share as much as we can to spread the burden, as it were. But I think the biggest thing that I would say that as a tribal college that we do is that we engage the student, not as that you know, sage on the stage relationship. It really is as a fellow community member, as talking to them, as getting to know them. As a college president, in typical mainstream colleges, my interaction with students would be minimal. On a tribal college, my door's open to students all the time. I got an email from a student this morning asking me a financial aid question. And I answered it. But, you know, that the level of interaction with the community is such that we're able to bridge those gaps that sometimes pop up in mainstream communities. I used to work at the University of Minnesota Morris in their Native American Student Success Program, which is a grant-funded program. And one of the things that astounded people the most was the first thing I did when I got there was, let's contact the families and let them know we're here. And the thought was, whoa, wait, talk to the families? I said, yeah, they're sending their kids to us. They want to know that their kids are safe, that they're being taken care of. There's that level of responsibility. We take that in loco parentis duty very seriously here. And I think that's something that really resonates with communities, Native communities, is that if they know that you're taking care of their students and looking out for them and giving them what they need, not just in the classroom, but outside the classroom and, you know, just in general, it becomes a very reciprocal relationship. And that is really, I think, the key difference in tribal colleges is that that's just something we do. We can communicate, you know, parents, kids, you know. One of the biggest things about this whole COVID thing is that I haven't seen some of our students now since March. And some of them just had children. And and then we do our Zoom meetings, and I see them, and I see their kid walking in the background. I'm like, wait, what the heck happened here? But that's the sort of thing that's a, a, a part of tribal colleges. And I think, kind of going back to the previous question, I think one of the things that's important is that here at the tribal college, we're about 86% native and 14% non-native. That's pretty much across the board. So we welcome members from the outside community to come in as well and participate, because that's part of the bridging process. They learn from us, we learn from them. A lot of our relationships that are now in place in Bemidji are because they're former tribal college graduates. They've been here. They know the community. But for those students who are going to a quote unquote mainstream institution, the vast majority of their interaction is not going to be with native staff, faculty. It's going to be with non-native staff and faculty. So it's really important that they are part of that process as well, because what winds up happening for a lot of native students in larger institutions is they glom on to the native person, the one native person in the department, and then that becomes their go-to person, and then they lose the richness of the entire college experience. But at a tribal college level, that's something that we embrace. It's like, all right, everyone, get together, community, family in a way. And this pandemic is the hardest thing about this pandemic for me at the college is I haven't been able to see the students the way I'd like to, because that's just what we are. That's what we do.
Amigos, thank you, President Burns. Anyone else on that topic, our tribal college students or anyone else that would just like to comment on the differences in the unique position of our tribal colleges here in Minnesota?
Hi, this is David Isham. I just want to reiterate the importance and the significance of our tribal colleges. We have one that is affiliated with the Minnesota state system, and we have a number that are not. But I would like to pass on that with our two-year institutions, that's the beginning. I mean, you can start at a two-year institution and make the transition to wherever it is you want to go. If you want to continue on in the state of Minnesota, you have that right to do so. If you want to go to Harvard or Yale or wherever your educational journey takes you, you have that ability to do so. But the important thing is to get started. And if you get started at a tribal college, you can expand beyond that. You can go to other institutions. At Metro State, the majority of our students at Metro State are transfer students. They start their journey at a two-year institution and transfer to Metro State. It does not mean that you do 2 years at a community college, transfer to Metro and do 4 more years. No, you do 2 years at a community college. You get that AA, AAS, or whatever degree you are seeking, then transfer to a 4-year institution and do 2 years there and focus on your major course of study and complete your 4-year degree. Sometimes that's lost in the shuffle. I do not know how many times I've talked to Native students who think that, yes, I started off at a 2-year institution. Now when I transfer to a 4-year institution, I got to do 4 more years, equating to 6 years of education. And a lot of that is because they don't have the mentor. They don't have the people behind them that will help them realize the significance of step-by-step working towards that particular goal of achieving a 4-year institution. We have people in our communities. I mean, we're seeing second, even third generation of college people now. Now they have the background. Now they have people who can help guide them. But there are people out there who do not have that behind them. They don't have the people who can help guide them towards the necessary steps to complete their degree. So there's a lot of unanswered questions out there. One of the first things I learned when I was in school, way back in the day, I had gotten out of service and started my educational journey at Minneapolis Community College. And it wasn't too long after sitting in one of the classes that, boy, they were getting ahead of me. You know, and these were 10-week courses. And by the third week, I was falling behind. 3 weeks into a 10-week term, I was falling behind. And one of the things I had to do is I had to swallow my pride. I had to raise my hand in front of everybody out there, and that's hard for a Native male to do. I raised my hand, and when they called on me, I bowed my head. I said, I don't get it. You're losing me. Can you explain it to me like I'm a 2-year-old? And that way there, they started breaking it down to that level. And once it got to the point where I started understanding, I said, oh, okay, I got it. And then we can start building from that. But without asking that question, it's different than high school. It's different. I mean, they watch you, they monitor you, they try to help you along the way. They, and you find out with your daily quiz and everything else. But in college, it's different. It all falls on you as a student. And you as a student should be able to understand what's going on. And if you don't, ask those questions. Ask, there's plenty of support services in many of the institutions. Seek that help. Look for it. This is important. This is significant to you. It's not like high school where they're going to come after you. No, you got to go to them. And that's part of growing up. That's part of being mature. That's part of being able to recognize your own shortcomings and address them. So I'd like to pass that on to everybody, that there are people out there to help. I mean, I get a lot of questions at Metro State, and I answer an awful lot of questions that are asked of me outside of Metro State as well. So please do not be afraid to ask. Which?
Thank you, David. And you bring up a really good point. It's been mentioned by numerous panelists already this morning, just talking about the importance of finding and having a mentor, of seeking out support services. You heard President Burns just say that he, on a tribal college campus, will hear from students directly and commits to following up with them. It's the reason why we have American Indian Resource Centers and American Indian Student Success Centers on our campuses. It's to provide those resources to meet the unique needs of our Native students. And so I really appreciate you highlighting that, David. I want to take some time now. We have about 20, 25 minutes left. I want to spend a bulk of our time talking about policy. And there's a couple of big questions that I want asked, and there's been a couple of questions in the chat that have been submitted alluding to policy changes or things we can do to better support Native students, changes we can make either at the campus level, the state level, local level, or even federal level. Before I ask each of our panelists about some of the policy changes that could or should be considered to support Native students in our communities, I want to talk a little bit about what it means to engage our communities and engage our members and our students. And many of you know that the Walz-Flanagan administration has committed to engaging in meaningful tribal consultation in the development of programs and policy. And this is evident with one of the first executive orders signed by Governor Tim Walz, Executive Order 1924, mandating that all state agencies engage in meaningful tribal consultation in that policy development. There's also a specific and unique commitment to engaging our urban Indian communities as well, our relatives living in our cities and suburbs and large urban areas throughout the state. I want to start this question off for Mr. Gwynn, John Gwynn with Migizi. If you can touch briefly on the importance of engaging our tribal nations and our urban Indian communities and our community organizations, why is that important? And really, when that's done well, what can we expect as a result?
Thanks, Commissioner. I can only speak, Migizi really serves the urban population. So I've been there about a dozen years, and what we've seen is that a lot of times, as you mentioned, the urban population, kind of each generation might get more removed from family and traditions, out on the reservation. So those mentor relationships that people have talked about so strongly, family, those resources might not be there as strong as they could be for urban populations. So I think that's where, nonprofits and community organizations, Indian education in the school districts really can step up and help the students that are in K-12 and provide as much resources as we can. And like some of the panelists and others have said, that might be just being a resource for questions about financial aid. It might be more of a mentorship. It might be saying, hey, you're a leader, you can do this. It might be taking them to, take a test or helping them with a FAFSA code. Just finding all those different ways we can help, I think, is really needed in the urban American Indian population, as far as my experience has shown.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And once again, just want to thank you for representing an urban organization here in Minneapolis that's committed to working closely with our K-12 public schools and Indian education programs, and providing both that support, within those Indian education programs, as well as programs outside within the community. So really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, and I would also like to add, sorry, Mr. Olson, just before you move on, we've been able to actually expand past Minneapolis in the past few years, so I'm really happy about that. We're working in St. Paul. We're even working in Fridley, Farmington, Hopkins. So we have a presence, and those districts also need, these services as well. So, and not just for McGizzy, but, any other organizations that can step in and help fill that need in other districts, I think is really, would be a great plus for our students as well.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point in that, a large majority of our Native students in public schools actually attend public schools in our urban areas, Minneapolis, St. Paul, surrounding suburbs, like you had mentioned, Fridley, Spring Lake Park, Osseo. Absolutely, it's important to have those resources in the urban community as well. Anyone else would like to weigh in on the importance of engaging our urban Indian community organizations, our urban Indian leaders, as well as tribal leaders? When that's done well, when those voices are amplified and those voices begin to drive policy, what can we expect as a result?
I see no one wants to touch that one. I think, this is just me personally, this is not me as president of the college, that the urban Native population is an untapped resource that I think not just the non-Native communities, but our Native communities need to re-embrace. And there's going to be a transition of bringing them back and us moving forward. The Native urban population has had a different life experience now than the reservation Native populations. It doesn't invalidate that experience at all, and that's the part that we need to recognize. Working and going to college, there was always that friction between the urban Indian and the res Indian. And that, to me, now, with benefit of decades of experience, that's a division that's being imposed on us. I don't think it's a division that we should embrace anymore. So I think it's important that we reach out to those communities, not just on the reservation, but on the urban areas, and open that dialogue. And I think that's one of the things that I really appreciated about Governor Walz, is that he's come to Leech Lake a few times. And it wasn't just, there was a political undertone to it, of course, but a lot of it too was just to meet with people and to talk to people. And that's where the relationship building is among Native people. It's not the glad handing and stuff like that, although that is there. A lot of it is just establishing that personal relationship, that ability to just say, hey, how you doing today? How's your kids? How's things going? And that's how you establish those relationships in the community. It's not all about what you need now. It's what everyone needs down the road. And so going to the urban Native communities and going to the Native centers and just sitting, not even being there for a formal event, but just being part of that, going to the powwows, going to the presentations that are going, the art displays, everything like that. I mean, the Native community down in the Twin Cities is just becoming so alive and vibrant now. And we're missing the boat if we don't embrace that with the same fervor that we embrace what's going on here on the reservation. And it's a lot of work. It is going to be a lot of work, but I think it's just that relationship building, and I think with Native people, once you establish that relationship, it's there. You can call on them for help at any time. And that's the big thing. I think from the tribal college perspective, going back to that, when we get calls from somebody to partner and they haven't done their homework, it's kind of off-putting. Like I said, if we're just a checkbox, check on their checkbox on their checklist to get a grant or to get funding, that's off-putting. But if they're coming and say, "Hey, last time we've talked, you mentioned that you had this need in the community. We've got this grant moving forward that will address that," then that's when the relationships develop. And I think more than any community, those personal relationships are key to understanding and working with Native communities.
Thank you, President Burns. So well put. Just the importance of building relationship and of taking the time really to spend time in community and with community members and with leaders. I'd be remiss if I didn't also note that the Office of Higher Education has a student advisory council, and that's an advisory council that's mandated by statute. And we were successful this last legislative session in working to grow the representation of that student advisory council and actually have a student representative from a tribal college on that. And, that's just another one of the ways in which we have to work to build relationships, but also to make the space to make sure that we're hearing from all the perspectives of students that we need to. On that end, President Burns had talked about relationship building. From any of our students, if you'd like to weigh in, how important is it, I should say, for you to participate in these conversations around developing policies that improve your experience? Do you feel there needs to be more? How can we better engage and elevate student voice in the development of policy? Any of our students want to weigh in there?
Well, part of the last question too, I think we need more positive role models and some more outreach. I work for Tugwee, the Native American Recovery Center, and I do the powwow circuit. I do the language camps. I mean, I'm part of that community, but I get more people interested and thinking about returning to school as when I write up their case plans here at the treatment center. I have one now working on his GED and a couple talking about going to college now. Before I started at Fond du Lac, school wasn't a priority on my list either. And now I make it something for each and every client that I deal with to even think about. And it's just a positive thing. And they need more positive role models. There's so much drugs and alcohol out there right now that they don't have the positive role models they need to keep them in school or even interested in school. When I was going to school, like they said earlier, I never planned on going to college. I'm in my 50s now when I started. So I was out of school for 40 years. And it's hard. And as far as right now, I am advocating for school like you wouldn't believe. Every single client I meet with, we all talk about going to school, and at least they're thinking about it now. It's not something that on the back burner anymore. It's in the forefront, and that's what I'm working on.
There you go. Any other students?
Jacob McCarthy here. I kind of going off what Clarence said about positive role models. I do think we need more of that. I think spotlighting some of the things our Native students are doing, student success stories, will go a long way. And speaking from a different perspective, I had the opportunity to work here at the Tribal College as the IT coordinator since March. I also serve as an American Indian College Fund student ambassador. So I do a lot of outreach in the community. talking to community members, trying to increase engagement. And a big part of that is telling my story, the success I've had, and just trying to explain that, try to explain to people that if I can do these things, you can do them as well, and let them know that there's support systems in place that they can come back to school and achieve success at any age. So I think really getting those Native student stories out there would go a long ways towards achieving that end.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jacob. Any other final thoughts before I transition to our final question? And I'd love to hear from all panelists. Any final thoughts on that last question?
Dennis, this is David. David Isham. Yeah. One of the things I would like to remind everybody who is participating in this particular webinar is that we are working with the wisdom of our predecessors. Way back in the day when we started evolving with Indian education, one of the things that they put out there for us to utilize as a tool, and sometimes it's overlooked, but it's an effective tool, because I've seen it work at a couple of institutions. It's for public institutions. There's a state statute out there that says if you have at least 10 or more Native students, by request, that institution has to develop an American Indian Advisory Committee to that president of that institution. So that's a tool out there. If you do not have one at your institution, consult with your president. Let them know that you would like to have a tool, have a voice in some of the things that are going on at your institution, and become part of the solution at that school. And one thing I do want to caution you on this is that first and foremost, you are a student. You're a student at that institution. Don't lose sight of that. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up on so many other activities that it's your grades suffer. It's just a word of caution. Know your limitations and explore them. Explore them and push them to your capability. I think you could do wonderful things out there, and I hope you do.
Very good, David. We have about 10 minutes left, a little more than. We've been getting a lot of questions in the chat. I know some that I've seen privately, some just to our panelists, and some that have been posted to everyone. There's been a lot of questions around professional development. There's been a lot of questions about how can we grow and support teachers of color and American Indian teacher candidates to diversify our teaching corps. How can we know more? We want to know more about transitions. This tells me that we definitely need a part 2 to this call. We definitely need a follow-up, a potential partner with the Minnesota Department of Education Office of Indian Education to help bridge that discussion around transitions from high school to post-secondary. So we will work on that internally. I want to let everybody know, but incredible questions. I want to end with a question posed to every panelist, and I'm hoping to hear from each panelist on this. What policy changes should be considered to support American Indian communities or American Indian students in higher education? What policy changes would you recommend? And if you don't have anything specific, what's a call to action that you would have, either for me as Commissioner of the Office of Higher Education, for our institutions, for the state legislature or the governor to consider? What are some policy recommendations, and what parting words or calls to action would you have for us? And David, since you're on my screen, I'd like to just start with you, and then we'll move through each of our panelists in our last remaining 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. There's so many different ones out there, but the one that comes to mind, and I've been advocating for strongly, is that we need an Indian education department separate from a multicultural component. Whenever we're under a multicultural umbrella, we get beat up. And because we get beat up, a lot of the issues that we are looking to resolve get meshed up in that whole system of multiculturalism. That does not mean that we cannot partner with our brothers and sisters in the multicultural area. It just means that we are unique. We are the ones that have treaty rights. This is our land. This is where we started, right here. So I think that I have a big push for the separation of American Indian component from the multicultural umbrella. Thank you.
Thank you much, David. President Burns, any final words on policy recommendations or calls to action?
I agree with David. I think sometimes, we get sublimated into this larger group and our own particular issues and things that we're legally we are supposed to be provided with get kind of washed out. I think the other thing is, I'm not a big advocate of throwing money at problems, but throw money at us. Especially at the tribal college, we do not get much state support. However, state of Minnesota is much better than the other tribal colleges that operate across the country. The state of Minnesota is the only state that provided some of their CARES Act money to the tribal colleges. There's 37 tribal colleges, only 4 tribal colleges got state money and support. If there is a policy change, I would states taking more active role in looking for funding for not only tribal colleges, but for also American Indian programs in mainstream and private institutions as well.
Thank you much, President Burns. Laura, as our outreach liaison for our Indian Scholarship Program here in the state, any policy recommendations you would have there or anything outside of that as well?
I would say that I think that the Walz administration has been really good about being proactive with tribal consultation. And I think that that is always a very vital component, because if you don't consult, you miss things. There are things that only can be taught in the moment. And so consultation is incredibly important to make sure that all the voices are heard. For too long, things have been taken from us or done to us. And so consultation ensures that we're brought into the conversation when we need to be. And so that would be my recommendation. As I stated earlier, I really am a strong proponent of mentorship. And so if there's any way of ensuring that students have the ability to reach out to mentors, whether it be just fellow, upperclassmen or an advisor in their school, I think that would be an incredibly important thing to add for students who don't have it already.
Thank you, very much, Laura. John, any calls to action, any policy recommendations?
Thanks. The only thing I thought of really was I know a lot of people have advocated over time for dual credit options. So high school students getting a chance to, dip their foot in the water, so to speak, and earn college credits. So I would maybe think of continuing that or strengthening that and increasing the outreach of those kind of programs.
I appreciate that. And that's certainly something that's on my list for a part 2 of this call, because it flows so well into that discussion around transitions and opportunities for students in high school looking at post-secondary options. Appreciate that. Chanel, any policy recommendations?
Yeah, so a few calls to action I would say would be increased funding and support for our tribal colleges, as well as our Indian educators who are K through 12, as well as some professional development opportunities for non-native K through 12 staff and post-secondary staff as well, so that they can be able to better assist when they're working with native students.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the professional development piece. Definitely something we've been seeing as a key theme in the questions in the chat as well. Wanting to learn more and seeking out additional professional development opportunities, particularly as non-native folks looking to how best serve native students. And finally, to our students, Clarence, if I can start with you, any policy recommendations you would have, calls to action, letting me know how best the Office of Higher Education or our administration can serve Native students. Any recommendations you have there?
The only thing I can think of right now is to recruit Native teachers and get the students while they're young with the role models instead of spending so much time trying to get the athletes in. We got to get more of the students in. Other than that, I mean, there should be some kind of incentive program to get the Native teachers and keep them. I mean, we don't have enough of them, and we need more. That's all I can think of right now.
Thank you much, Clarence. I appreciate that as well. And I'll just say that that's been a key theme in the chat as well, is how to increase and diversify our teachers and particularly those serving non-Native students. I think, the research will tell us that all students benefit from being taught by and being addressed by teachers of color and American Indian students, not just Native students, but all students. I really appreciate that. Jacob, any policy recommendations or final calls to action from you?
Maybe not so much policy, but I would like to see call to action to get our reservation communities connected. We have a lot of accessibility issues, internet, lack of broadband infrastructure, wireless coverage. A lot of our students are kind of shut out of that. Since school has transitioned to being online, so many students aren't able to connect and even go to school. So that's a big barrier that we're facing. I'd really like to see more resources put towards removing those barriers.
I mean, good, Jacob. I appreciate you highlighting that. That's the first time we heard that on this call. That is a huge barrier, and one that I think we saw, really highlighted during the current pandemic with COVID-19 is, connectivity issues, particularly in Greater Minnesota and in our tribal and reservation communities. Certainly something that we need to continue to build the infrastructure around and improve. Appreciate that highlight there. And certainly something to discuss on a follow-up call. Finally, Alyssa, if I may ask you, any policy recommendations you have or calls to action?
Yeah, so hi everyone, this is Alyssa again. I honestly just think that the Braided Journeys program at my high school, I wish every school that had Native students in it had something like that. And it's like I wasn't even a junior in high school until I had my first Native teacher and seeing someone represented like that, so that was definitely different. And I'd just say hire Native educators.
Great final words. Really appreciate that. And for those that have been hearing Alyssa discuss the Braided Journeys program, we can send some information out about Indian education programs in general across the state and opportunities there, which leads me to wrap up here in our last minute of the call. I want to close by first thanking all of our panelists for their time today. Chimagwech, we really appreciate your participation, for sharing your words, your experiences, and really asking us to look deeper and to work further to improve the overall experiences of Native students and to continue building on some of the incredible things that we already have in place. I want to remind folks that we'll be sending out an email with some of the resources mentioned, like I said, as well as some information about housing. You heard from Dominic McQuarrie from the governor's office at the beginning of the call. I also want to remind folks that you'll see a survey after the call, and would really encourage you to complete the survey. It helps shape our future calls that we offer here from the Office of Higher Education. And then finally, would just like to remind everybody that our next call is on October 28th. And our topic is going to be student mental health. And so if you haven't had an opportunity yet, please check the Office of Higher Education's social media accounts, website for a link to register for that and other upcoming calls as well. And we will be in touch with a a follow-up for a definite part 2 to this conversation. So once again, thank you to everybody who joined our call, and a special thank you, Miigwech, to all of our panelists for joining us today. And with that, we will conclude today's public engagement call.
Great job, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.